This week I almost walked out of a grocery store before I even finished my order. We've talked a lot on this show about standards and decency and public behavior. Well, this week I ran into a couple at a grocery store that I've run into in probably 2 or 3 other stores over the past month when I've been out shopping. And let me describe this couple for you. So it's 2 people. One of them is a man. The other one I believe is a woman, but I cannot be sure. And to give you the visual, the man is probably 6.5 feet tall and probably weighs about 50 pounds less than I do. Very, very, very thin. Noticeably thin. And I believe, but cannot be certain, can't be certain about anything these days, that he thinks of himself as a trans woman. The makeup style is Marilyn Manson, so it's heavy goth. He usually wears a short, a very brief cut-off crop top and the smallest shorts I can remember seeing in a long time. If you know what Daisy Dukes are, these are smaller than that. His buttocks are hanging out of either side of the back of the shorts, and I don't just mean a little bit, I mean most of the full buttock. You have to quickly dart your eyes away because you are afraid that if he makes one incorrect move, his genitals are going to flop right out of it. And I think this is deliberate. He's got more skin exposed than he's got clothing exposed. I don't know if I'm painting a good word picture for you, but the impression that you get from this is that you have walked into somebody's home in their bedroom and you've seen something that you shouldn't have seen, something that you're going to forget that you saw, something that you are going to never mention, and just pretend that it never happened. 3 times in the past month, I've run into this couple. And I actually got, aside from being uncomfortable looking at this, it actually made me angry. And when I got to my car, I tried to figure out what is it about this that's making me angry. And what's making me angry is it's a perfect illustration of the fact that we have, as a society, no sense of decency or shame left to draw on at all. So when I was thinking about the show this week, I thought, what is this about? Well, it's about having no boundaries between public and private, no boundaries between personal, public, and political. But it's not just about not having boundaries. It's about actively testing boundaries, actively pushing against what few social barriers still exist in the United States for decent public behavior. 30 years ago, now let me say it this way. There isn't a manager, an employee, a restaurant owner, or a shopkeeper today where I live who would dare to say anything to people who walk around in public like this, because they know that if they did, they would be on the front page of our weekly alternative newspaper as a cover story the following week, being accused of discrimination, transphobia, fomenting hatred, and endangering the lives of trans women. That is the society we live in, and that is the political atmosphere that I live in Greater Burlington, Vermont. And it's like this in many places. I know it isn't like this everywhere. Hopefully where some of you are, it isn't like that. But then I thought, well, 30 years ago, a store manager might have ejected such a person, but I wonder if this situation would ever have come up 30 years ago. I don't think that many people would dare to walk around like this. There's a word for this. This is indecent. It's obscene. This is public indecency and public obscenity. And I know that those words are out of fashion because they suggest thinking about boundaries, what's appropriate to do out on the street versus what's appropriate to do in your bedroom. And the very concept of boundaries, one of the foundational principles that is necessary for humans to get along with each other, necessary to teach children so they understand the difference between what goes on at home privately and what goes on publicly, so that they understand when people are getting outside their place and may pose a social or other danger to them. We should be teaching children these things. We don't. We tear them down. Look at how many commercials, whether it's products, it's software, books, cars, electronic equipment. How many commercials have you heard in the past few years about defy boundaries, tear down boundaries, break through walls? The entire theme of our society is tear down standards. There's no escape from it. And I'm angry. I was angry at the store because there's no escape from it, and because I know that there are other people around me who feel the same way that I do about this, and none of us feel that we can say anything. We don't feel we can do pushback. I mean, you who listen to me, you who watch this show, you know that I'm, compared to the average person, rather unafraid of confrontation. But that doesn't mean that I'm totally unafraid of confrontation. I'm not infinitely bold. I won't say anything in any situation. And there are times when I'm not up for it. And mainly I'm not up for it because I know that I won't get any support. Even if there are people there who agree with me, even if they're saying to themselves silently, thank goodness somebody said something about this, they will not signal that. They won't reach a hand out physically or metaphorically because they're afraid that they'll be next. And so if I were to say something, or anybody were to say something in a situation like this, we're going to be left to be socially punished. We will be called the aggressor. We will be pilloried. Our reputations will be smeared. We are more likely to be told never to patronize this store again. I don't know what else to say about this. There's so much to say, but it's difficult to figure out where to start. It isn't just about issues of nudity, appropriate or inappropriate clothing, sexualized clothing. This lack of boundaries and lack of etiquette, lack of politeness, lack of theory of mind. Theory of mind. So theory of mind is just a way of saying that a person is conscious that other people around him or her also have a mind, they have a brain, they have an internal dialogue, they have interests. And having theory of mind is a necessary quality so that we can empathize with other people. And I mean empathize, I don't mean sympathize. I mean imagine ourselves in that person's shoes. What would I be thinking if I were him? How would I feel about what I were observing if I were standing where he is standing? And this helps us govern our own behavior. I noticed this in the lack of care that people take just in everyday, ordinary transactions. People don't say please and thank you very much anymore. They don't even excuse themselves if they invade your personal space. Another example, grocery store. So much of this comes up at the grocery store. I go into the Price Chopper last week at 4:30 in the afternoon, left work a little bit early. It was already packed. It was as if business hours had already closed. There were lines at the cash registers all the way up 4 or 5 aisles. So it wasn't just that people were coming out of the cash registers and into the travel lane. They were backed up down the spaghetti aisle, down the coffee aisle. There were probably 35 or 40 customers there and 2 checkers on duty. And this has become normal now. Stores and restaurants can't get enough help. People aren't working because many people are still sitting on unemployment benefits at home, making more money in an unemployment check than they could get on the open job market. And this has left store staff absolutely frazzled. It contributes to stores shutting down ad hoc. You know, sometimes you'll drive up to a restaurant on a Tuesday and you'll just see a hand-lettered sign on the store that says, sorry, closed today, don't have enough staff. This has now become normal. It's been quote unquote normal for a year and a half. But as I'm standing there in the grocery store in one of these interminable aisles, people are trying to get by, you know, because we're all of us customers are standing here in the travel lane because there literally is nowhere else to stand with your basket. And people are cutting in line to get through. And of course, that's fine because there's no other way for them to get from one side of you to the other. But coming right up in front of my face within 3 inches, I mean, so close I can smell their cologne as they're going by. They don't even look at you, let alone say, would you excuse me, please, or pardon me. They just shoulder through. They shoulder through and they walk right past you like you are not standing there. People are not paying any attention to other people and other people's interests. I don't know if they like being treated this way, but the callousness that I experience with interactions with other customers, you know, when they interact with me, when I see them interacting with other people, has just become normalized. The level of civility has plummeted through the floor. And this has been a problem that has been going on in America for quite a long time, but it has never been as acute as it has become in this past year and a half that we are living in this never-ending pandemic, this new normal. When are we going to start building back better? Oh, no. I don't actually want them to build back better because I know exactly what that's going to be. I'd settle for going back to half the rudeness we used to have. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. Decency, shame, the fact that we have none, the fact that we don't care that we're telling lies, we don't care that we're exaggerating, we don't care that we're misrepresenting things. I got a couple examples for you, but first I want to do a reminder. I don't know how you get our show. I don't know if you watch us on Rumble or Odyssey or YouTube or if you listen to us in audio format, but we are good for the car. If you're one of those people who spends time in the car, subscribe to us on audio. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, almost anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find Disaffected. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I almost always have them on in the car. For the past couple of years, I used to have NPR on in the car all the time, but obviously that's unacceptable anymore. So it's podcasts, and I get better information and frankly, better analysis from the people's podcasts that I listen to than I can get anywhere else. So take us along for the ride. Please, if you like us, subscribe. And I would say that also for the video platforms. I forget to do this myself, but there are a number of people that I follow on their video channels. If you like what you hear, hit the like button. If there is a space there to give us a rating, we'd really appreciate you giving us a rating. And if you get us on video, subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. And also hit that little notification bell that YouTube pops up. I forget to do this sometimes. And I wonder why I'm not seeing any new feeds in my subscription, whether I'm listening to the lady who talks about politics in Tudor England or the guy who dissects airplane crashes. It's a little window into some of the things that I do when I'm not talking about this stuff. So hit the little notification bell, because if you don't, you won't be alerted to when we have a new video coming out. So thanks very much. Do appreciate your support. I want to move into some more shameless behavior this week. We talked about this last week, and it just gets worse. The bloodthirstiness that we're seeing regarding COVID. The way that people are talking about unvaccinated people, they're talking about them as if they're unclean, as if they're dangerous, as if they're plague carriers. I haven't yet seen somebody come right out and say it. I'll bet someone has. I haven't yet seen it, but you can hear what people actually want to say about the unvaccinated. They want to say unclean. They want to say vermin. They want to say danger, outsider, other who's trying to bring plague into our village. And the delight that people are taking when they hear news of a public figure or somebody whose name has come into the news, who's been known to object to mandatory vaccines or to say, I don't want this. As soon as they hear that this person got COVID, especially if they're in the hospital, it all comes out. I hope they die. They don't deserve an ICU bed. No ICU for the unvaccinated. They're not holding up their end of the bargain, so let them die. This week, I was just astonished to see this. We'll put it up on the screen. This is a tweet from tennis legend Martina Navratilova. And it is a picture of a tweet about a man named Phil Valentine. I'll read the tweet to you. This is the original tweet, not what Martina said. Outspoken Nashville-based conservative talk radio host and vaccine skeptic Phil Valentine, who battled COVID for a month, died at 61. And the rest of the tweet, the original tweet, instant karma's gonna get you, gonna knock you right on the head. You better get yourself together. Pretty soon you're gonna be dead. A quote from John Lennon. Delightful, huh? Martina Navratilova thought so because she wrote, womp womp, no mercy from me for this guy. What do you mean mercy, Martina? He's already dead. What else can you do to him? Well, except dance on his grave. Who thinks this is entertaining? Who takes pleasure in someone else's death from a disease? What does that say about us? Why is this socially acceptable? Why were there thousands of retweets of this? Why are people basically doing a jig on social media to see who can get the cruelest dig in at the guy or the woman who just died? We have no shame. We have no decency. And I know that fear motivates this. People are afraid. If people weren't afraid, they would not be listening to all this nonsense that comes out of the media. They would be able to say to themselves, there's no evidence for this. There's no evidence that I'm very likely to die from this, so I'm not going to worry about making sure my kids are masked in school. I'm not going to make my young children do this. I'm not going to be waiting for the vaccine because my children statistically are highly unlikely to have anything resembling serious illness, let alone death from the vaccine. But they are so scared by the constant drumbeat on the mainstream media, from the CDC, from the White House, and from politicians on the left, almost exclusively on the left, that they're not thinking. But it isn't just fear, as I've said before. The fear response tends to bring out sadism as well. And while sadism is something that we usually think about in terms of very dark kinds of personalities, personality disordered people, we often hear it spoken about in terms of the traits of the dark triad, which is one way of describing narcissism, sadism, and psychopathy. All of us have elements of sadism. All of us humans have the capacity to be sadistic, to be cruel, to delight in the misfortune of other people. We all have that capacity. And sometimes, even those of us who try to live our lives the best way we can and not give in to those dark urges, sometimes we do. Sometimes we say bad things. We do bad things. But we've been given social permission to do this now and to be proud of ourselves for doing this. People do it on social media so that they will get applauded for this. They are brandishing their sadism and saying, clap for me. I hate him like you hate him. It's grotesque. It's like a Roman circus in digital form. Speaking of shameless behavior, Schenectady, New York. I'm going to play you a little clip of something. We've got the whole thing on our YouTube channel if you're interested in checking out 25 minutes of this mess. There was an incident a couple of days ago in Schenectady, New York. I don't know what, if anything, precipitated this, but it was video taken by a woman who decided that she was going to unload her animus, her resentment, and her narcissism on volunteer firefighters, police officers, emergency medical teams who are having a street fair in Schenectady, New York. One of those things where you just put up a tent and you pass out cookies and information on smoke detectors. So let's run a little bit of that clip. I'll give you a taste.
Look at this one. Fucking sitting here like she 91210. Ain't got nothing else to do. Don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. Thank you. Do your job and shut the fuck up. Thank you. Oh, yes, Mr. Youth event. I don't give a fuck. I can speak to you wherever I want to. It's a free motherfucking country. And if I say bitch or white bitch or honky, there's nothing you can do about it. Thank you, fucking honky. Yeah, bitch. Say that shit. What's your chest? The fuck? Fucking pig-ass niggas.
Yeah, I know. We've heard stuff like that before, but you know what? Before recently, mainly you heard this kind of stuff bleeped out on things like the now defunct Jerry Springer show. Now it's just a free-for-all for anybody. We have the entire 25 minutes of this ridiculous encounter up on YouTube. This woman filmed herself doing this. And we put the clip up on YouTube, and a couple of people who followed me said, you know, what set her off? What set her off? I don't know. I don't have the context outside of what you see in this video. But really, it does not matter. Here's the answer. Nothing set her off. There is nothing that justifies that behavior. There is no context. I don't care. I don't care what she would say. Well, somebody was rude to me, or somebody called me a bad name, and so blah, 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 or I've had this terrible experience with police. This is not a question of being set off. And I don't mean to sound like I'm lecturing. It's a natural question, but I suggest thinking behind that question. We tend to do this because we want to make moral sense of what we're seeing. We think there must be a rational reason why somebody would lose control this way. I think that's often a mistake. I think we do need to ask the question first, when people are upset, when they're in high dudgeon, yeah, we do need to look at the context. But when it comes to behavior like this, that can be a trap in the other direction. It can have us clamoring to find a reason that would make this somehow more understandable. I don't see any context that would make this understandable. This is an assault, unprovoked, on people who did nothing to this woman. Not today, not yesterday, not any other day. This is narcissism run amok. And we get social media plaudits for it. That's why she did it. That's what set her off. Her own narcissism set her off. Shameless. Maybe I should call what I'm about to talk to you about next covert shamelessness, because it's much softer and cuddlier, but it's no less manipulative. It's no less underhanded. So I looked at CNN the other day. We'll put an image up here of a tweet describing the headline, and then I'll bring you a little bit from the story. Story here on CNN, and the accompanying picture is the hand of a grown man holding onto a toddler's hand in bed, so it looks like a father holding onto his child's hand in a hospital bed. This is how CNN framed it. Quote, I'm sharing our family story because it is my sincerest hope that no parent or child ever finds themselves in the circumstances of needing care and not being able to get it because of the poor decisions of others. You know where this is going, don't you? This is a story by Ben Tinker, who's the producer of a segment on CNN called CNN Health. And it is describing his experience with his infant or toddler son, who is in the hospital for a childhood virus called RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus, respiratory syncytial virus. It's apparently common in children and usually is not severe, but was severe enough that his child needed to be brought to the hospital and given oxygen to get through it. The entire thing is a histrionic display of the tormented parent looking at his child full of tubes with an oxygen mask on and thinking, how much worse would it be if some of these terrible people, these irresponsible people who don't get vaccinated and end up in the hospital with COVID, what if you can't get an ICU bed for your child? Let me read you a little bit from the story. This is from Ben Tinker. When my husband and I were counting down the days to the birth of our son last year, one of my best friends shared this quote with me. Making the decision to have a child, it's momentous. It is to decide forever to have your heart go walking around outside your body. We go on in this vein. 2 weeks ago, as I watched as my heart lay helpless in a pediatric ICU bed, hooked up to a tangled array of wires and tubes and life-saving machinery, cared for around the clock by a team of a dozen doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists. COVID-19 hospitalization rates among children and adults under age 50 are now the highest they've ever been. And still, we don't have a COVID-19 vaccine for children younger than 12. I'm going to take that apart for you because it's very misleading. And most readers who saw this story will not see how this is misleading because they won't go behind that sentence. I'll repeat it for you again. COVID-19 hospitalization rates among children and adults under age 50 are now the highest they've ever been. Notice what he did there. He mashed together two very disparate age groups. He wasn't exactly dishonest, he didn't lie, but he misled. Children and adults under age 50. What you're going to walk away with, what the casual reader walks away with is hospitalization rates for children are skyrocketing. That's what he wants you to take away, and that's why he mashed it together with the under 50s. And why? Because there aren't enough children without the and adults under age 50 to support this claim. Let's separate adults under 50 from children. Let's look at the actual numbers. So I will show you the source that I use. This is a source that the writer Ben Tinker actually hyperlinked, so you can go over there. It's a chart from the Centers for Disease Control. So it's going to say, if anybody is hate watching this, I don't know if I have any hate watchers yet. I don't know if I have people who disagree with me on this who watch this. Maybe that's asking too much because people don't like to listen to anything that they have decided they don't like first. But if you are someone who disagrees with me on this, I'm just going to point out that these are numbers from the CDC. These are numbers from an agency that people who disagree with me say that they trust. So I'm using sources that people like that say that they trust. Okay, so you can't automatically write them off. Let's put up an image of this chart that Ben linked to show hospitalization rates for various age groups. I know that you cannot read this. Even if we were to blow it up all the way to full screen, you would not be able to see all the data because it's represented visually with very, very small bands. So I actually went in and pulled out some of the numbers for you. You can go and look at this chart yourself at the CDC and hover over the various vertical bars on that graph and find out. This is a graph that represents hospitalizations. I believe, but I cannot confirm because this is not clearly labeled. I looked very carefully when I looked here. This chart does not clearly label whether the numbers that it represents are total hospitalizations during a period or newly counted during a 1 week period. That makes a very big difference. For some reason, they don't tell you. So, this week, chart from the CDC. The new cases, I believe this represents new cases in hospital, but if I'm wrong, I'll correct it next week. New cases this week in the age group 18 to 49, okay, so not children, 18 to 49, is 895 cases. Let me give you a little more detail. Ben Tinker said that COVID-19 hospitalization rates among children and adults under age 50 are now the highest they've ever been. Either he misinterpreted this chart or I have misinterpreted this chart, because it doesn't say that. Reading this chart, if I'm correct, says that the highest rate for new hospitalization for those age groups was January of 2021 for ages 0 to 4. So newborns up to the age of 4 years, and for the age group of 5 years old to 17 years old. Highest rate in January of 2021. The bar in this chart that represents this week all the way over on the far right is nowhere near the peak in this chart. So I don't know exactly what he's talking about. The most recent week is August. And if you look at that chart, and again, I know that you're not going to be able to see it in detail, but notice those vertical bars. Do you see at the top, there's a very, very small little darker bar that looks like a cap at the end of that chart? That's the children. That's the part. Look at how small that is compared to the overall rate. This is just visual proof of, I mean, it's a visualization of numbers, but it shows you what a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of hospitalized severe illness COVID cases are represented by kids either 0 to 5 or kids 4 to 17 years old. But this entire story, and it goes on at some length, it's about 3 or 4 pages long, is full of high drama. It's full of melodrama. You know, I was crying, I was scared, and then I thought, what would happen if other parents weren't so lucky as I was to get an ICU bed? And this is why responsible people everywhere who care about people in society need to get vaccinated. And it's all based on either a misinterpretation or an outright misstatement of data from the CDC. Honestly. That's enough of that. We have a lot more. Come back and see us after the break. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. I want to say thank you, first of all, to everybody who has signed up to donate and support this show. There are people who do it on Patreon. There are people who do it on Subscribestar. Doesn't matter where it comes from. We appreciate it. You guys are getting in on the ground floor as we're building this show up from nothing. We just started in January of 2021, and you are really helping us, and I appreciate that so much. There are people who give us $10 a month, $20 a month, $2 a month, £5 a month. All of it is to the good. All of it helps. This does cost money, and in order for us to grow, it's going to cost more money. So I want to say thank you to all of you. I don't read your names out, and I don't put you in the credits the way you see on some other shows. I'm not sure if I'm right about that, but the reason why I don't do that is because this show, I realize we talk about controversial topics, and I talk about them very candidly. And I say things that maybe you don't feel that you can say in your social circles. So I kind of don't want to out you, but I know who all of you are. I see when you sign up. I'm the guy who sends you the thank you email and says, hey, come join us for a Zoom hangout. That's one of the things that you can get. If you are a financial supporter of this show, look at patreon.com/disaffected or go to subscribestar.com patreon.com/disaffected. And we do a monthly Zoom hangout. It's not recorded. It's just all of us talking with each other about anything you want. I get show ideas out of this. I get to know the stories of some of you who show up for our live premieres on Sunday and who talk in the chat, and I love that. And earlier today we had one, and we'll be doing another one next month. So if you want to get in on this, one thing that we can give you, we're still two guys with day jobs, right? So there's only so much we can do on the show, but we're trying to bring you as much as we can. And one thing that we can do to say thank you to you for helping us financially is to invite you to talk with us and come share your story. So if you want to be in on those Zoom hangouts, join us, become a supporter, and we'll get you on board. One of the things that we're able to do, and we'll be able to do more of because you support us, is a special edition of the show that we put out this week with my good friend Helen Dale. Helen is an author, a lawyer, and a commentator who is often seen or heard on talk radio and the news in the UK. She's a conservative, she's a Tory, and she has an incredible story. Her first book was written when she was a very young woman in her 20s called The Hand That Signed the Paper. And it is a novel about a Ukrainian family that emigrated to Australia after World War II. And the book tells the story of many of these family members and what they had to do to survive during their time in the Ukraine in World War II, and the absolute moral quandaries that these ordinary people, these shopkeepers, these housewives, these farmers, the things that they had to do to protect their own family from something even worse. And we sat down and talked with Helen, and I want to show you a little clip of it and suggest that you watch the whole thing because she has a fascinating story. And we titled the episode Proto-cancel culture because Helen's experience is one of the earliest examples of cancel culture that has become so familiar to us today. So let's take a listen to this.
As a result of largely of me winning that award, although there was a little tiny bit of it beforehand, the hand that signed the paper became enormously controversial. Broadly speaking, one of the attacks on me was I was accused of anti-Semitism. And the bulk of the basis for this accusation, it had two aspects. One, I had portrayed my Nazi characters or Nazi allied characters. They weren't actually the Nazis. They were people who collaborated with the Nazis from Eastern Europe as sort of normal human beings who seemed to be, in some ways, not so much sympathetic, but people who you could relate to and think, I know people like that who could be sucked into something in that way. So they seemed fairly normal. I didn't make them two-headed alien babies as Nazi characters are often portrayed in sort of war films and Where Eagles Dare and things like that. And the other aspect of it was the beginning of something that is now very widespread, of the attribution of the views of an author's characters to the author. So, for example, a couple of my characters are concentration camp guards, and they say concentration camp guardy things. They're fascists and racists and sexists and all of the things that go with those kind of extreme right-wing politics. Now, those views were attributed to me. I had, masses of newspaper articles written about me where a character in a novel, the winner of the Miles Franklin Award has to be a work of fiction, were attributed to me. And no matter how often I said the very standard literary line that writers have done since time immemorial, these are characters in a novel, they may be based on historical figures, but nobody could go back and talk to dead people, so therefore you have to make them up. You have to rely on historical records at the time and see what people said and how they thought about things. So a bit like the German politician, I was relying on historical sources. And where I did get to interview people, I was having to interview people who were very old. And older people's memories start to fade. So you have to make a lot of it up. Now, what happened as a result of that was an extraordinary, decades-long attempt to ruin my career.
Sound familiar? That happened in 1995. This started for Helen in 1995. And as she pointed out in the full episode, and I definitely encourage you to go look at it because her story is incredible. She isn't the first example of this. The most famous one happened in 1999 when author Salman Rushdie published the Satanic Verses. That was probably the biggest first example of the insane cancel culture, the death threats, the attempts to pulp books. Of course, as Helen points out in the episode, it's gone even further now. In those days, it wasn't possible to stop a book from publication. These cancel culture campaigns only started after the book came out. But today, books are actually being trashed by publishers before they're even printed because of these campaigns. So definitely check this out. We spent a little bit more than an hour talking to Helen, and it's a really instructive lay of the land of where this started, why it started, and where we're going with it. And those of you watching this, I see the question coming up in the comments. What is that set? Where is she sitting? Helen is coming to us from the studios of the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, lotuseaters.com. I encourage you to look at it. It's a great podcast. It's headed up by Carl Benjamin. Some of you may know him by an online handle that he used to use more frequently, Sargon of Akkad. It's a fantastic show that talks about wokery from his point of view and his team's point of view in the UK. And they very generously made their studio available to Helen and available to us to bring us that interview. So thank you very much, everybody at Lotus Eaters. We really appreciate that. I'm going to switch into... well, we're going to talk more about COVID. You know, I talked with Kevin, the producer, about this during the week. You know, what subjects are we going to cover? And sometimes we say to ourselves, oh gosh, it seems like, we're hitting the same topics, but really, folks, these topics are putting themselves in front of us, and they can't be ignored. This comes up with the trans issue, which I've said before, I think is probably the most pure example of the narcissistic, emotionally unstable character of our culture right now. It's the purest expression of it. But this is coming out in terms of COVID-19. It's coming out in terms of public policy about vaccine mandates, vaccine passports. We've got to keep talking about this stuff. And we've got to talk about it in a way that most people aren't talking about it. And this is a great example. I was actually very surprised to see this. I'm heartened to see this. New York Magazine took on the question of whether children should be wearing masks. Title of the story: The Science of Masking Kids Remains Unclear. New York Magazine. Strapline. Not the strapline, actually, the first sentence of the story. I'll read you a couple excerpts to set this up for you. At the end of May, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published a notable, yet mostly ignored, large-scale study of COVID transmission in American schools. Distancing, hybrid models, classroom barriers, HEPA filters, and most notably, requiring student masking, were each found to not have a statistically significant benefit. In other words, these measures could not be said to be effective. I'm going to put it in even more straightforward terms for you of my own. They found no benefit at all from masking or HEPA filters or 6-foot distancing or 3-foot distancing or hybrid learning and Zoom learning. They did not find any evidence that these practices reduced the COVID transmission rates in American public schools. This is a study done by the Centers for Disease Control, the cathedral of the science that everybody who thinks that people like me are raving lunatics. I'm going to the very same sources that you claim are authoritative. I'm reading the same words that you can read. I'm doing the same arithmetic that you can do. If there's a problem, it's not with me or Kevin or your neighbor down the road who doesn't like masking. If we're all looking at the CDC, which you claim to be the gold standard, the problem is not us. This is a study that New York Magazine described as both ambitious and groundbreaking. It covered more than 90,000 elementary school students in 169 Georgia schools from November 16th to December 11th, and looked at all their mitigation factors and compared them. CDC, biggest study, found no benefit from masking or any of these other COVID protocols. A couple of interesting quotes from researchers connected to this study from this article. This is Vinay Prasad, an associate professor at University of California in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. Quote, that a masking requirement of students failed to show independent benefit is a finding of consequence and great interest. I would say so. The writer of the article, the New York Magazine article, had this to say. Scientists I spoke with believe that the decision not to include the null effects of a student masking requirement and distancing and hybrid models in the summary of this paper amounted to, quote, file drawing these findings, a term researchers use for the practice of burying studies that don't produce statistically significant results. Here's another quote. This one is from Tracy Hogue, also an epidemiologist and the senior author of a different CDC study on COVID-19 transmission in schools. She said, the summary of the study gives the impression that only masking of staff was studied. That's not true. When in reality, there was this additional important detection about a student masking requirement not having a statistical impact. So what she's saying, and she's right, is this study didn't just look at whether staff were wearing masks. It looked specifically at children wearing masks. But the summary at the top of the study, that they know that most people aren't going to read past the summary, that most headline coverage is going to come from a distillation of the summary. The summary gave the impression that they didn't look at student masking, that had nothing to do with it. Why? Is this honest behavior? Is this trustworthy behavior? Is this what we expect from scientists? Well, I shouldn't even just say scientists, because I have no evidence that the people doing the study necessarily had any bad intentions there. They may well have been pressured to write it up this way. And I've got some examples of that. People are afraid to say what they know to be true, even if they're experts in a field, even if they are the authors of a study or they're qualified to comment on a study. They are afraid to say 2 + 2 = 4 without giving a caveat. This does not bode well. One more excerpt from the article. After the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics issued their student mask guidance last month, I contacted both organizations asking for the evidence or underlying data upon which they had based their recommendations. The American Academy of Pediatrics did not respond to multiple requests. The CDC press office replied that since children under 12 cannot be vaccinated, the agency, quote, recommends schools do universal masking, and included links to unrelated materials on vaccines and a recent outbreak among adults. So the writer of this article specifically asked the CDC, who published this study of 90,000 elementary school students that found no benefit to masking or any other COVID protocols. They simply would not respond to his direct question. They would not respond. They acted like they did not hear what he said or could not read or understand what he said, like he didn't say it at all. Why? Is this trustworthy behavior? They ducked the question. That drives me crazy. I see this a lot. I know a lot of you see it too. You read articles in the newspaper or anywhere, in any media, and you see writers who actually ask direct pointed questions and say, what doesn't make sense to me is this. I see this study on your site did not find this, yet I'm reading your press release, which strongly indicates that it did find this. Can you help me understand? They don't even try to weasel out of it anymore. They simply do this. They close their mouths. They don't respond. They don't indicate, even with a look, that they heard you. They just don't respond. And they get away with it. Interestingly, I noticed this throughout the rest of the article. The writer talked to several epidemiologists. I've quoted some of them earlier. Most of them whose comments made it into the article, I think what I'm detecting with these people is they are afraid to say 2 + 2 = 4. Because several of them pointed out that this study showed there's absolutely no evidence that masks are stopping COVID transmission among students or among staff. But they went out of their way, most of these people, to add caveats and qualifiers. And I in one sense, I don't blame them, because I know what's happening here. They're fearful. They are fearful of stating 2 + 2 = 4 without saying, but if that's uncomfortable for you, it doesn't really have to be 4. I don't like it, but I understand why they're doing it. They are correct. Their jobs probably are in danger. That's really frightening, my friends. That's really frightening. But they basically say, this study doesn't show this, but I'm not contradicting the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I'm not contradicting the CDC. IngSoc, right? Black is white, up is down. There's no such thing as truth. And we're all afraid. We're all afraid. And if we're not sufficiently afraid, we've got politicians who are here to remedy that for us. Been paying attention to anything that's going on in Oregon lately? I mean, aside from Portland being an absolute third world shit show run by Antifa, people shitting on the sidewalk, Antifa having gunfights with others. This past week, Oregon Governor Kate Brown, well, why don't we just run the clip and you can listen to it. I don't need to set it up for you.
Today, I'm announcing that effective Friday, August 27th, masks will be required in all public outdoor settings where physical distancing is not possible, regardless of vaccination status. Masks have proven to be effective at reducing transmission and are a necessary measure right now, even in some outdoor settings, to help us fight COVID and to protect one another.
Ugh. Outdoor masking. She instituted an outdoor masking mandate. And as soon as I saw this news and people started commenting on how deranged it was, the pushback that came from the pro-masking people was all about, nuh-uh, nuh-uh, nuh-uh. No, she said when physical distancing isn't possible, so you're trying to make it sound like she's extreme, but she's not extreme. She's only saying when you can't physically distance, so it's not crazy, da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, these people go nuts trying to find some way to shoehorn this derangement into something that looks rational. It's not rational. Outdoor masking, my God. There's almost no evidence of outdoor COVID transmission. There never has been. This isn't new. We act as though COVID is something that came down out of the sky, like something out of the Andromeda strain, some microbe or some virus from a passing comet or an alien spaceship that is wholly unlike any other respiratory ailment that humans have ever dealt with, and it's not. We are not afraid of catching flu outdoors. We're not afraid of catching other respiratory viruses outdoors. We know that these things happen in places where air is recirculated, but mainly when people are sick and symptomatic. They're coughing, they're sneezing, they're running a fever. The symptomatic stage is when you are shedding most of the pathogens that make you contagious to other people. This is stuff that happens largely in the home and hospital setting. And this woman wants to have us outdoors. And I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. I see this a lot in female politicians. And I'm going to get in trouble for this, like I get in trouble every time I bring up something about how certain women, certain power-hungry women, use feminine affectations to get tyrannical things over on you and disguise them as something else. There's a Jungian, I believe it's a Jungian archetype of major forces, major mental pathways that they propose shape how we experience the world and how we treat others. And I keep thinking of the archetype of the devouring mother, the overprotective mother, the mother who is so concerned with mothering you that she mothers you to death. I see the devouring mother in Oregon Governor Kate Brown with her pearls, with her sensible suburban mom Bob, with that, frankly, with that look on her face, that smiling, kindly librarian look with her carefully modulated National Public Radio tone of voice. Head back a little bit. I don't read this as natural. I read it as an affectation. This isn't actually maternal. It's about control. It's tyrannical. It's about scaring you to death and delivering it looking like a mild-mannered library who wouldn't say boo to anybody. Librarian, excuse me. We can't keep putting up with this. It's not kind. It's not maternal. It's not protective. It's tyrannical. Worse than us, though, are the people down under. I was going to say I feel sorry for people living in New Zealand and Australia, and I do. But I confess that I have a hard time. There's a certain place where my sympathy stops because so many of them that I notice online, I don't know what public opinion polls would say, but so many of them seem to like what their government is doing to them. The number of how dare yous that Australians and New Zealanders sent to me on social media over the past week after I talked last week about how some Australian regions have been sending out the military to enforce COVID restrictions. They're angry. Like, we're not a lunatic, you're a lunatic. This is keeping us safe. We're not like you selfish, psychopathic Americans. People are saying this to me. It's psychopathic to be concerned about the military enforcing COVID restrictions or pulling people out of their homes, as we've seen in Australia. I'm psychopathic for being concerned about that. The people actually doing it are not psychopaths. They're loving you. They're taking care of you. So this is from an MP, an Australian MP, Anastasia Palachuk. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Announcing a quarantine facility. Listen to this.
This is a commitment by the Wagner family working with the Queensland government to say to the people of Queensland, we want to keep you safe. And the best way to keep you safe and to keep Delta out of Queensland is to build as quickly as possible a regional quarantine facility. I have listened to Queenslanders. I know how much they support a regional quarantine facility to be in Queensland. They want their community kept safe. That's what they're saying to me, and we are delivering it. This is a race. We are up against a highly infectious Delta variant that's sweeping the world. We don't know what's next. We need to get these facilities up and running, and everybody has seen how successful Howard Springs is.
Did you hear the music? It's hopeful. It's positive. It's a little bit of tension to it, a little bit of wistfulness, but it's in a major key. It's happy music, not sad music. And if you can't see that, this is all shot in the bright sunlight, high noon. brand new airplanes taking off and leaving at this airport. We're on the, we're moving up. We're building something for you. Our MP characterizes this as a gift from the Wagner family. I don't know who the Wagner family is. Perhaps they're the Australian equivalent of the Walton family who owns Walmart here. I don't know. But it's a gift. They're doing this for you. Queenslanders have said they want this, so we're giving it to you. This is really important. We want to keep you safe, she says, over that happy music, happy family music. We're up against a highly infectious Delta variant that's sweeping the world. The Delta variant, there's no evidence that it's actually any more dangerous than any other variant. Some people are actually starting to talk about it. It may be more contagious, but there's no evidence that that it actually produces worse disease. But you wouldn't know that from everything they're claiming in the media. How many more of these are we going to have? How many more variants? Is there a limit? Is there a limit for the people right now who are still on board with this? Who are still frightened out of their wits a year and a half into this, as deaths have plummeted. Deaths and severe illness in hospitals, we can treat this better than we could treat it back in the early part of 2020. People are not being put on ventilators first the way they were at the beginning, which was actually harming people. We've gotten better at this. We are much better off. First of all, in my view, none of this was necessary. None of this needed to disrupt the entire way of life in Western nations. It did not mean to cripple our economy. It did not need to put this many people out of work. We did not need to pull children out of school. We did not need to muzzle our children with masks and frighten the shit out of them over something that is vanishingly unlikely to kill them. None of this was necessary, even at the peak of this pandemic. This was a hysterical overreaction, the likes of which we have never seen before. This is not normal. And it's not just that we were stupid in 1968 or 1969 when the Hong Kong flu came along, but we didn't shut the world down. That was actually sensible. We quarantined sick people. In this one, we're quarantining well people. I don't know who qualifies to go into, what is it called? This new facility in Queensland? It's not a camp. Don't ever say camp. The Queensland Regional Quarantine Facility at this, I think this is the name of the airport, but it's just too appropriate, at Well Camp. Oh my God. And before I came into the studio today to record this, because I told you last week, or it was the week before, that I was surprised that here in Vermont, where I live, in bluest blue Vermont, that I did not see a lot of people starting to mask up again with this new ramping up of fear about the Delta variant, but I may have spoken too soon because I'm starting to notice it. Granted, I was at the Hippy Dippy Grocery Co-op today, so you're likely to find more people of that frame of mind there than you would at just a regular working class grocery store. But I saw it again today. And I saw young people, I saw middle-aged people doing it in greater numbers than I've noticed for months. And as I drove out of that parking lot, I saw a man leave the co-op grocery store. He looked like he was about 40 years old, well-built. He obviously works out. He's muscular. He was putting his backpack on because he's there on his bike, and he's going to bike home. He puts his backpack on the rack of the back of the bike, and before he unchains his bike, he masks up. This big, strapping, healthy, muscular guy puts his mask on, and it's not just a cloth mask. He strapped himself down with an N95 filtration mask, the kind that's more difficult to breathe through, that's more effective, but more difficult to breathe through, the kind that's much more difficult to breathe through if you're doing aerobic exercise like biking. None of this makes any sense. Does he think the COVID is going to fly at him just on Main Street in Burlington, Vermont? I don't understand. Well, come back after the break and I'll talk about more things I don't understand with you. See you on the other side. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. Got some interesting stuff to round out this show with. But before that, I want to ask you for your help. I would like to ask you, listening and viewing, to help us grow this show by sharing us on social media, or I thought of an alternative. Like I said in the last segment, I understand that some of you watching the show who really like the show might be a little bit nervous about being identified with the show. That's why I don't put your names in the credits. I don't actually name you when I thank the people who financially support the show, because I don't want to out you. But there's another side to that. And the other side is when people are afraid to share this content like this. I'm certainly not the only one, but I think this show is I do think it has a unique niche. The topics that we talk about here, that I talk about here, I know that you hear these topics on other shows, but I think our perspective brings something that most other shows don't. We look at this through a psychological lens, mostly having to do with the traits that we see in personality disorders, but also having to do with the reactions, the emotional reactions, and the reactions in the real world that non-personality disordered people are forced into because we are all swimming around in so many narcissists, so many borderlines, so many histrionics, and so many psychopaths. If you don't want to share us on social media, would you pick one friend to share this show with? Send a private message to her. Call her on the phone, then send her a link. Tell her about the show. Pick one person that you trust and say, give this show a listen. Pick your favorite episode. This is episode number 34. We've got a lot to choose from already. Let them know. We would like to grow this show. We'd like to grow the subscribers. It's hard work, right? There's a lot of competition out there. And I can't prove this, but I think the major social media companies well, at the very least, they're not helping us with their algorithms, and I suspect they may be actually standing in our way with their algorithms. I think there may be some things that make us less likely to show up in searches, less likely to show up in suggestions. That means we need word of mouth. So if you'd like to do something for the show, you don't want to support us financially, which is fine, can't afford that, want to do something different, there are lots of ways to help. One way you can do that is to tell your best friend about this. Yeah, and if you're a little bit nervous about telling your best friend about the show, I actually do understand that. But that might be a really good opportunity for you, too. I know, it's a trade-off. Find one person and share it. I'd really be grateful. Thank you. We've got several clips here that illustrate really clearly the characteristics of people who have a histrionic personality. What you're about to see here is a series of videos taken by a man named Christopher Elston, known on social media as Billboard Chris. Chris is a Canadian father who has been standing out on Canadian city streets wearing a literal wooden sandwich board, educating people about what's happening to children who are being pushed down the transgender route. He gives out information on the harmful effects of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. He educates people about the fact that girls as young as 12 or 13 years old in North America are getting elective mastectomies. Some of them are being put on a path that is going to lead to hysterectomy, cross-sex hormones. And the people who hear him sometimes at first don't believe him, but he's telling the truth. You start giving cross-sex hormones to a teenager, the outcome of that is sterility. Sterility is permanent. Doesn't mean, oh, they just can't have a baby while they're taking cross-sex hormones. It means they are sterilized. This is what we're doing to children. And Chris has been taking big risks to his reputation. He's incredibly brave. I've been talking to him, and we're trying to get him on the show. He's interested in coming on, and I think we'll be able to arrange that soon. But I want to share a few of his videos with you for a couple of reasons. I want to spread the message that Chris is spreading. I also think he is a great example of moral courage, telling the truth even though it's unpopular. But this particular set of videos shows an encounter with a young gay man who is so captured by the cult mentality that has taken over what is called LGBTQ+. I was going to say taking over the gay community, but as I've said before, we don't have a gay community anymore. It is LGBTQ+. And what that means functionally, you can get rid of everything but TQ+. Lesbians can't be spoken. You'll almost never see the word lesbian used by any of even the major organizations that used to campaign for gay marriage. They erase them. Lesbians are called bigots if they don't want men who call themselves trans women in their women's shelters or on their roller derby teams or anywhere else. And this young man is a member of this community, and his behavior and his reactions are a good opportunity to illustrate some of the defensive reactions that people who have a lot of histrionic characteristics display. So let's roll the first clip here. I can't remember exactly how Chris comes in, but Chris is standing on a street. I don't remember if he's in Toronto or in Quebec City or Montreal. He's wearing a sandwich board with information about puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and what's really happening to so-called trans kids. This young man that you'll see in the video walked up to him. It's not that Chris accosted him. Chris didn't walk up to him. He came up to him. So let's take a listen.
What do you think is the problem with my sign here?
What do I think the problem with your sign is? The problem that I think with your sign is that it is well shown in studies that when children do not get the sort of support that they need in terms of their identity, it leads to depression, it leads to anxiety, it leads to suicide, it leads to all sorts of things.
You think that's well shown, do you?
Yes, I do. You know what? Hey, I can tell you're about to cut me off.
Oh, okay.
I work with children. I know that this is something that's well documented when it comes to race. I know that it's well documented when it comes to gender. And I don't think it's a far reach to say, apologies, I'm not done up. And you know what? I don't think it's a far reach to say that if people are being supported in their gender, then whether that's cis or trans, then it's not going to lead to good places.
Okay, well, first of all, it's a myth that children will kill themselves if we don't
No,
medically
it's
transition them.
not a myth. You're old, so you lived through the 90s. Oh, sorry, did I stoop low? You've lived through the 90s. Presumably, you might have even lived through the 80s. So you lived through a higher than average and an increasingly growing suicide rate in queer teens. So clearly something's going on. Maybe, not as many teens were coming out as trans then, but I watched as I was growing up, the people in my age group growing up not being supported and getting all sorts of shit and watching them succumb to these terrible things. Oh, and look, you've got sunglasses, so I can't even really see who you are.
Oh, here, I'll take them off.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Is it my turn?
If you want,
Okay.
I probably am not actually going to listen.
Okay.
But you know what? I'm sure you're not actually listening to me either.
I am.
Because, okay, great.
Yes. Why do you think gender nonconformity requires unproven experimental puberty-blocking drugs, cross-sex
Oh, you're
hormones, and
gay!
surgeries?
Oh my god! You're someone who hates yourself so much that you have to stop other people from being themselves. I see.
It's a battle for me not to, I was going to say, rise to his level of histrionic outrage, or is it stoop? Oh my goodness. I'm of a mixed mind on this. I'm not really, but I do have some conflicting feelings about this because I recognize some of my younger self in some of his behavior. I don't think I was ever that extreme, but people who knew me when I was that age might have a different view. So I guess if you really wanted the truth, you'd have to ask some of my old friends. I hope I wasn't that extreme, but I recognize some of this. This young man, you are looking at somebody who does not have a well-developed ego structure. And when I say that, that surprises people sometimes because we tend to think of people who act out this way. One of the ways we describe them is as being egotistical, right? And it is egotistical behavior, but actually, truly, in a foundational way, not a pop psychology way. He doesn't actually have a well-developed sense of self that is confident and genuine and authentic. He's scared. I know it doesn't seem that way, but these histrionic affectations are covering up fear and insecurity. He's not actually certain of what he's saying. And I'm speculating here. I don't know this guy, right? But I've known so many people like him. I have known so many people like him. Sadly, this is not uncommon among young gay men. Yep, it's stereotypical to say that, I realize, but the stereotype is rooted in truth. No, not every young gay man is like that. The majority of people are not like that. But this isn't just 1 in 100 either. This is a fairly common character type among young urban gay men. The snotty, affected, cutting. I mean, what he is he's a bitch. He's a bitch. He's a little gay bitch. And I say that having been a little gay bitch myself. A little bit of that is funny. A little bit is amusing and spicy. A lot of it is intolerable. It's insufferable. I mean, you're old. You lived through the 90s. The 90s. Oh, you're old. And then sorry, did I stoop low? You know, moving your head to the side, looking with the eyes, you know, the this and that. There's more of it. Let's look at the next one.
The High Court in England ruled that children can't give informed consent to these puberty-blocking drugs. There's never been a single clinical study on
That's because it's a thing that's like, so...
You don't think we should have clinical studies into pharmaceutical
I'm not
drugs
saying
that
that
we're
we...
giving to little children?
Hey? I'm not... Ooh,
What's up?
she's sassy.
Yeah, you got it.
She wants to fight. She knew that I was not prepared when I came up to her. Yeah, you know what? Cool.
Why do you think that a pharmaceutical intervention should be the first option? Let me finish my sentence, please. If a child never showed any gender nonconformity growing up...
Are you looking to see if there's a crowd growing?
No. If a child never showed any signs of gender nonconformity growing up or unhappiness with their birth sex, and then they suddenly show this at, say, 11, 12, 13 years of age, why do you think the very first option for this child should be a medical intervention involving unproven pharmaceutical drugs instead of talk therapy?
I mean, I don't think that parents go to the pharmaceuticals for the first thing. A lot of
you can't even find a counselor for these kids anymore, and the government's trying to pass a bill that'll make counseling illegal.
You know what? I do know that you're not allowed to show this video anywhere without my consent.
I don't need your consent at all. We're on a public street.
That's true. You got me there. Well,
I got you on a lot of things, brother.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to say you're an asshole.
All right.
Cool.
Well, I just want to say that gender nonconformity is a beautiful thing, and we shouldn't be giving kids drugs that are going to irreparably harm them for life.
That's also not true, because these things can go back. There's plenty
right?
there are plenty of situations in which people have
So if a girl goes on
detransition.
puberty blockers from the age of 11 to 16 and then comes off, you think she's going to go through puberty?
I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, that is a thing that has happened.
You think she's going to go through puberty from 16 to 21, for example?
Puberty is a changing of hormones. Puberty doesn't, like, denote a specific change with specific hormones.
I'm finishing my notes here. There's so much. I don't know where to start. This is classic projection, right? This young man is narrating his inner goals, his emotional state. He's projecting it out, and he's saying that it's Chris who's doing it. Okay? Are you nervous? Are you looking to see if there's a crowd that's going to show up? That's not Chris, young man. That's you. You are nervous. You are the one who keeps looking around to see if there's a crowd. You are the one who's hoping to get attention. You want to be the diva. Not Chris, you. You're talking about you. Projection. Very, very common. We all project, right? But people like this project a lot. And the reversal. Did you catch the reversals here? And you saw it in the last clip, and you saw it in this one. For those of you who are listening and not watching, he's literally wagging his finger. He's got his index finger up like a school teacher, wagging it in Chris's face. Oh, no. Don't cut me off. Let me finish my sentence. No. He's the one cutting Chris off. He's the one who won't let him speak. But he reverses it. Did you hear? Ooh, she's sassy. She wants to fight. If you're not familiar with gay male lingo, sometimes when gay men are camping it up with each other at a bar or at a party, we'll refer to each other as she. I'm merely explaining this to you. I'm not either saying it's a great thing or not. I don't particularly care. I'm just explaining to you a phenomenon in the world. That's what he's trying to do to Chris. And he wants to fight. This young man wants to fight. He wants to be sassy. He wants to be the bitch. But he can't own his own motivations because he's ambivalent about them. He's not secure. He's nervous, and he's not sure that he's actually right. And he's not, I would guess, he's not actually sure that his behavior is morally right. He feels compelled to do it, I would guess, but I think he has some doubts about it. And in order to get on top of those doubts, he's taking the things about himself that he suspects are bad behavior and he's projecting them onto Chris. None of this is coming from Chris. Chris doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't gesticulate. He doesn't accuse. He's simply trying to speak. And the truth comes out, doesn't it? I guess I just wanted to say that you're an asshole. Yeah. I think that is just what you wanted to say. Got a couple of more. Let's listen to the next. Let us listen to the next one.
I want you to show me right now. No, I know. Listen.
Right now.
Hey,
go to my
listen,
website.
I understand you're with him. I have no beef with you. Just please stay out. Okay?
I have a bunch of studies on my website.
Listen. If you came out, you were clearly looking to engage with people like me. So show me. Please show me right now.
Well, I'm filming you right now.
Okay. Well, then I don't believe you. Please show me right now.
Go to billboardchris.com.
I'm not doing that.
Okay, here's what you can do.
And I don't want to see a single thing from you. You're not in this.
Well, we'll bring it up on his phone.
You want somebody to show you, right?
You want to see it?
No, I want him to show me.
Why does he have to show you?
Because he is the one with the billboard.
Okay.
He is presumably billboard Chris.
Start up your phone and I'll show him on your phone. By the way, go to Billboard Chris on Twitter later tonight to watch your whole video.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just saying, you should check it out.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay. I'm sure your friends will let you know.
No, they won't.
Okay.
I think you overestimate how popular I am.
Let's bring up the studies. Here we go. Okay, you ready, my man?
I'm sure I'm not. I'm sure you have something wild that's going to bamboozle me and stop me right in my tracks, don't you?
All right, so here's what you should do. Go to my website,
No.
billboardchris.com. No, don't want to do it? All right.
No.
All right. So here's a little spreadsheet. So these are academic studies going back to 1972. You can click on them all.
1972 when gender identity was...
1979, 1986, 1987, 87, 95, 08, 08, 2012, 2013. There's another one on the homepage just from this year, which showed that in the latest study of 150 boys with gender dysphoria that they followed for 20 years, 87.8% of them, their dysphoria desisted. 65% of these boys grew up to be gay.
Okay.
Okay?
And?
So what we're doing is we are taking gender non-conforming kids, majority of which will probably grow up to be gay. We're blocking puberty in them. We're stopping their sex development.
Okay, so
We're
you're...
sterilizing them. And if they were just left alone, almost 9 out of 10 of them would see their dysphoria desist, and a lot of them would just grow up to be gay.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. The gesticulations, the bitchery. You know, it reminds me of a scene from Mommy Dearest. It's a scene where Joan Crawford picks up Christina from the boarding school after Christina got in trouble for literally rolling around in the hay with the stable hand. All they did was kiss. And they pull up in front of the house, and Joan turns to Christina and she says, Barbara Bennett is here to do a cover story on me for Red Book. And I don't want any trouble from you. That's what this guy reminds me of. He's channeling Faye Dunaway, channeling Joan Crawford right out on the street. He's really activated. This guy is really emotionally activated. He's very angry. It almost looked in this clip as if he was going to actually put his hands on one of the two gentlemen standing there. There's an assistant with Chris who's off camera, but you can hear him talking to this guy. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. No, actually don't. No. You know, I don't want to see a single thing from you. It's, you know, it's so hard to know what to do with people like this. Well, there isn't really anything to do with them. I mean, you know, there's always going to be people like this. I hope that in time, this young man, when he grows older, will understand something that he clearly doesn't understand. This is an example. There's another clip. I'm not going to play it because I think we've shown enough of this, and I think anything more would be gilding the lily, so to speak. We've talked before about the ways that those of us who come from abusive backgrounds, if our parents were abusive, personality disordered, of course, I have no idea at all who this man is or what his background was like. But I'm not going to lie. I have some very strong suspicions. Yeah, I do. I'm betting he came from a cluster B household because he looks like he's well on his way to cluster B himself, if not already there. This looks to me like something, all of this behavior is very consistent with histrionic personality disorder, but there are features of it that are illustrative of behaviors that you see in people with borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. He's very emotionally dysregulated. Of course, I have no idea. I can't actually diagnose anybody, but I know what I'm seeing. And these kinds of behaviors almost always come from traumatic background experiences. That doesn't mean that the way he's treating other people is okay. It's not okay. You have to make a decision at some point in your life not to replicate and to put onto other people what was put onto you. But if I'm right about this, if I'm right that may be the kind of household or the kind of background that he comes from, the other thing that it does, being raised this way, is it breaks your ability to discern friend and foe. It makes you open your arms to dangerous people, dangerous practices, untrustworthy people. You tend to want to be friends with them. You find them charismatic. You find them compelling or fascinating or hysterical, or you like the aura around them. You like the life of the party aspect that such people have. And you expose yourself to predators. But the other side of that is you make enemies out of people who are not actually your enemy. You fight against people who, if you gave them a chance, probably have your best interests at heart, or at least are not ready to take advantage of you. And I think that's what's going on here. This guy's very angry with Chris. He feels very threatened. His ego feels threatened. He feels very insecure. He's so worked up. I'm not exactly sure why, but he, this young man, has identified himself with these so-called trans kids. And this is the really, I don't know how to explain this. These kids, most of these kids, not all of them, but the majority of kids who end up in a situation like this will grow up to be gay. They're effeminate behaviors if they're a boy, or they're masculine behaviors if they're a girl. Sorry, statistically, folks, yeah, that does indicate a likely homosexual outcome. That's what the studies show. And you know what? You know it. I know it. All of you know it, because you can see it with your own eyes. You've all seen it. You all know it's true. Right? But these kids here are not going to get the chance that he got. They're going to be put on puberty blockers. They're going to have their bodies screwed with. And Chris actually wants to protect them. Chris has these kids' best interests at heart. If this young man could drop the ego and drop the brittle defensiveness and see that the guy he's treating as an enemy is actually the guy that he could probably depend on and trust. It's very sad. But it's also very obnoxious, and I've had quite enough of talking about him. I want to close up with something similar in the same vein. An exchange I had on Twitter. And I pulled this out because I've had this exchange with people on social media, sometimes in person, but usually on social media. I've had it for years now. What I was doing on Twitter, I wrote a thread earlier this week talking about how important it is to be able to distinguish the difference between two things that people confuse but that are not the same at all. And those things are bipolar disorder, which is what we commonly know as manic depression. I'm going to have to stop saying commonly know, because they're working really, really, really hard to get rid of manic depression, because it's the euphemism treadmill. And as soon as the reality catches up with the euphemism becomes dirty and too descriptive, and people know what it means too much. So we have to have a new name for it so that we can reset the sympathy meter. Bipolar and borderline personality disorder are two of the most common disparate mental health conditions that are not the same, but that are frequently confused with each other. They're not only confused in popular parlance, but they are very frequently misdiagnosed by medical professionals, including mental health professionals. What is most common is that somebody who has borderline personality disorder gets diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. And I think this happens for a couple of reasons. Some of the reasons are understandable, others are not so understandable. The understandable confusion between these two comes from the fact that both of them share mood swings. So manic depression, bipolar disorder is one of the major distinguishing characteristics is that a person who has it swings from absolute elation. They're on top of the world. They find themselves smart, funny, charming, creative. They can take on the world. They're going to get this new project out. And then they swing all the way back down to a place of suicidal despair or torpor and inability to get out of bed. People with borderline personality disorder also have wide mood swings, so they share those things. But this is a surface level similarity, because these syndromes do not come from the same place and they're not treated the same way. So the medications that are used for manic depression, bipolar disorder, things like lithium salt, are ineffective with personality disorders. They don't treat that because that's not the condition that a person with borderline personality disorder has. Here's an easy way to distinguish them. And I would say, especially if this if way of thinking is fairly new to you, try to notice if you make these assumptions. If you think you know people who are, quote, bipolar, think again about it. Go back and think to yourself, is this just received wisdom? Is this what I've been told? Or does this look more like borderline personality disorder to me? Because the literature actually shows it. It's not just my observations, although I have observed this over the years. The literature actually shows that medical doctors and psychiatrists very frequently misdiagnose. They give a patient a bipolar diagnosis, but that patient actually has borderline personality disorder. The misdiagnosis is common enough that treatment centers that focus on borderline personality disorder are aware of it and write about it in the literature. So the way to one way to distinguish is the mood swings in manic depression or bipolar disorder tend to occur over a longer period of time. Somebody might stay in the high phase for a week or 2 weeks, or what we sometimes call the manic phase. And over the course of a week or several days, they might shift over to the other extreme into the suicide and the apathy. People with borderline personality disorder change much more quickly. There's a Jekyll and Hyde aspect to their mood lability. Labile mood lability means mood swings. This can happen within the course of minutes, hours, or a day with people with borderline personality disorder. So it's not the only way, and it's not an absolutely foolproof way of distinguishing, but if you know somebody in your life who has these wild mood swings, but you see them happen within a day, within a few hours, that doesn't sound like bipolar. It doesn't sound like manic depression. It sounds more like that person you know might have borderline personality disorder. And it matters. It matters for you because you can expect different things from these people. They're going to act in different ways, but it also matters for them because the treatment is very different. If you've got a borderline walking around who's been put on lithium, you're giving him medication that is not actually helping him, and he's getting the side effects without the benefit, and his actual problem has not actually been diagnosed. He doesn't really know what's wrong with him, and neither do his doctors. So he's actually not being treated. He's being mistreated. So I did a thread about this because it is such a common confusion, and it plays into, I call bipolar a sympathy diagnosis in some cases. I do think that there are credentialed clinicians out there who knowingly have patients that they know have borderline personality disorder, and they fib. They tell them that they have manic depression, and they give them that diagnosis. Why do they do that? I think some of it is motivated by sympathy. I think some of these clinicians know that, yes, when you have borderline personality disorder in your medical chart, that is a warning flag to future people who may treat you. Whether you approve of this or not, whether you think it's ethical or not, is not the point. People with borderline are very difficult to treat, and they are some of, not all of them, but of the mental illness patients, clinicians sometimes see them coming and go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? These people are very refractory to treatment, most of them. They can be very vicious. They're unpredictable. And they're untrustworthy a lot of the time, especially when they're decompensating. So I wrote on social media a thread about this, and I'll put up the first tweet. I'm not going to give you the whole thread because it would be too boring. But this tweet is the one that got the reaction, and I said, the reason I insist on understanding the difference between borderline and bipolar is not what most people assume. My primary concern is not, quote, so that sufferers can get better help. It's about us protecting ourselves from the personality disordered. And I mean that. I'm not unconcerned with the fact that people who have borderline personality disorder aren't getting the right treatment. I'm not wholly unsympathetic to that. I do wish that for them and for us. But it is not my primary concern. I'm not a therapist, and if I were, I don't think I would be a therapist who would specialize in treating the cluster B disorders. My personal experience is too close. I don't know that, even if I were qualified to do this, I don't know that I could bring myself to be the best advocate because, quite honestly, I care less about what happens to that person than I care about her victims. That's the God's honest truth. I cannot change my feelings, and I don't feel bad that I made that calculus. I think too few people do it. There are plenty of people out there. There are plenty of mental health professionals who do want to help these people, and thank goodness for them. It is not my moral obligation to feel that way. I don't have to put my emotions in line with that to be a good person, so I'm not going to do it. And I would like other people to at least think about that because I think a lot of us get caught up in feeling pity and sympathy for people like this and treating the borderline or the narcissist as the primary victim. It comes out in the way we talk about it. Oh, look at that behavior. He needs help. I've talked about this before. Why is he needs help the first thing we say? Why isn't the first thing we say, oh my gosh, look at those people he's screaming at. They need help. You never hear that. You only hear he needs help. So when I say these things, I always get pushback. I sometimes get overwrought accusations. I'm usually called mean or unethical or sometimes sociopathic. And that's what happened here. So I'll put the next tweet up. Somebody reacted very badly to this. But this is a very common reaction to this conversation. This person said, I'm sorry, but what you're saying is incredibly gross, stigmatizing, and not at all scientific. It's dehumanizing. My response was one word. Nope. Nope. No. What I said is not gross. It's not stigmatizing. It's not unscientific. And it's not dehumanizing. It's candid. It's telling the truth. And there's precious little truth-telling about conditions like borderline personality disorder. Precious little. I don't know. I'm going to give you the rest of the exchange here. I do not know this person. I don't know what their mental health state is. I don't know how they're situated in life. I don't know who the people are who are in close relationships with them. There are several possibilities. I've seen all of these. I think there's a high likelihood, I won't give you a percentage because I'm not certain enough. I think there's a high likelihood that this person himself might have borderline personality disorder because this is a prototypical reaction from borderlines. I've had countless numbers of reactions like this from people who say, I have borderline personality disorder, and then they go and spew invective at me. Why is it typical of borderline? Because it says that truthful things that I'm claiming are unscientific. It injects a moral dimension. It says you're stigmatizing. This is what people say when they don't want you to tell uncomfortable truths, right? They say you're stigmatizing. There's no way that you could say the truth that they would not say was stigmatizing. There isn't a way that you could phrase it better. I have tried. You can't. This is really shut up. What that means is shut up. Stop putting a mirror up to me. Stop telling people the truth. Stop letting people see my behavior for what it is. I can't take it, and I hate you. Again, I don't know about this person. I don't know if he has borderline personality disorder, but this kind of reaction is very common. It's also common from people who have someone close to them who does have borderline personality disorder, and the person objecting to someone like me is enmeshed with that person who has borderline personality disorder. They're often an enabler and a codependent. They see their borderline lover or mother or husband or whoever it is as primarily a victim, somebody who has been hard done by in life and now is being hard done by this nasty man on the internet who doesn't say snuggle bunny things about borderlines and how they're not that different from us. They just feel more. They need more hugs. That's what they'd like. People who have been trained to react this way often lash out at people like me. I lashed out at friends when they would point out that my mother was doing something inappropriate or abusive. And a lot of times, I'm sorry to say this, but it's also very common. I would lash out at friends who were saying that to protect me from my mother. I would make excuses for my mother. I would say my friends were being mean. They didn't understand. My mother was a depressive. She had anxiety. She's very fragile. She needs people who are understanding, not people who are judgmental. These were friends who could see that my mother had hurt me, really hurt me, and misled me. And they wanted to wake me up. And I got angry at them and I said, shut up. So it can come from many different places. But I want to show you how nonsensical it can become. Let's look at the next tweet. The person says, you don't need to protect yourself from people with borderline. I'm taking a guess you don't know the first thing about mental health or treatment, or else you wouldn't need to ask a very basic question about the difference between borderline and bipolar. There's a couple of different things going on here. One is the first statement. You don't need to protect yourself from people with borderline. Yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do. Just like you need to protect yourself from anybody who is apt to act in an abusive way, pathologically lie, emotionally manipulate, reel you in for sympathy, and then stick the emotional knife in. You absolutely need to protect yourself from people like that. It's ludicrous to suggest otherwise. But also, this person was so clearly emotionally activated by what I said that he did not actually read my thread, or he read it so quickly that he didn't understand it and take it in. He had a narrative in his head that I was a villain because he says, I'm guessing you don't know the first thing about mental health or treatment, or you wouldn't need to ask a very basic question about the difference between borderline and bipolar. I wasn't asking a question. I made a statement. I actually said, I'm going to illustrate to you the difference between bipolar and borderline personality disorder. Here is what people think they mean. Here's where is that is incorrect. And here's the right information. I wasn't asking the question. I don't need an answer to that question. I already know the answer. I was making a statement. Emotionally activated, not reading, reacting to a person, reacting to somebody who's not me. Somebody in his head, but not me and not my words. And he goes on in that same vein and says, any first-year psych student who has taken abnormal psychology could tell you, quit the pseudo-intellectual bullshit when you don't even know the very basics. Again, he's not talking to me. He thinks he's talking to me, but he isn't talking to me. I'm sorry to say that no, any first-year psych student can't tell you the difference between borderline and bipolar. Why do I know that? Because I can see them. I can see these first-year psych students, second-year psych students, third and fourth year. I can see graduates with having had a major in psychology who go on and mix up borderline and bipolar all the time. I see therapists out there who say, I don't think I got the training I needed to understand the difference between a client with a normal range personality and a cluster B personality disorder. This was not in our curriculum. We were not taught how to deal with these clients. Can anybody help me? I see this all over the place. So just wanted to share that with you. It's an example of the negative way that people react to talking about these very serious emotional and character disorders. They don't like the truth to be spoken, and they especially don't like people who are unapologetic. And I realize my personality is not to everybody's taste. I am more confrontational than average. I'm snarkier than average. I stick my foot in my mouth sometimes. Sometimes I go overboard and I have to dial it back and say I'm sorry. It's been my temperament my entire life. I think it's going to be my temperament for the rest of my life. But despite how activating people find that, and I understand if the rough parts of my personality snag with someone else's, they don't, not everybody's going to like how I do things, and that's fine. But I'm not actually doing any of this out of cruelty. I'm not a cruel person. I've done cruel things, like most people have. I'm ashamed of them. I try very hard not to do them. But I'm not cruel. I don't hate people, and I don't wish suffering on them. But I'm also not a perpetual victim. And I don't believe in covering over the distorted behaviors of other people that lead to broken relationships and can lead to mental illness in other people simply because the emotionally fragile don't want to have a mirror held up to them. Like that young man that we talked about. He doesn't like having a mirror held up to him, but he holds a mirror up to himself. Anyway, folks, that's a wrap. That's another episode of Disaffected. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.